you haven't figured it out already, today's video is going to be about top making, and specifically making tops for art and farmers markets. So not only am I going to talk to you about a lot of the tips and techniques of how to make this stuff, but I'm going to show you some ideas for doing it live in front of a crowd, or using demonstrations like this to draw people into your booth to help you sell stuff. And you know, I don't know if it's embarrassing or just odd or any kind of weird, but you know, with all my work on YouTube, all my writing for magazines, all the furniture pieces I've put out there, all the art pieces I've sold, I'm most known as the top guy. Because I don't get recognized for any of that other stuff out there, but I could be in the middle of a grocery store and some little kid will come up to me and say, "You're the top guy, you're the top guy. You got any tops?" Or I've literally been getting my hair cut. Yeah, I used to get my hair cut. And telling people that, you know, I'm a woodworker, right? So art market stuff. And they'll start telling me this great story about this guy that was doing live demonstrations and he made their daughter a top. I mean, this stuff, you can't make this stuff up. People are being random stores to say, "Hey, I know you. Weren't you that guy on Congress Street 6 years ago that made me a top?" Well, yeah. So I'm going to show you the kind of tricks that I've been using over the years that's gotten me that reputation out there. And hey, if they know me as a top guy, they see me at art market, maybe they'll buy some of the more expensive stuff besides these cheap little tops. In order to make tops the way I'm going to show you today, you're going to need a few things, including a lathe. Now, you don't need a full-size lathe. In fact, probably 80–90% of all the tops I make are on a little jet mini lathe. But if you can, get one with a variable speed. It'll make things a lot more efficient, and when you're doing live demonstrations, it's nice not having to swap out the gears. But every now and then, I do show people gears so that they can understand how things work, especially if you're a little kid wondering what your lathe is. Bring them around, show it to them. It's kind of a relationship builder. Next up, you're going to need basically 3 types of gouges. You're going to need a standard spindle roughing gouge. I prefer a 3/8 inch spindle gouge with a fingernail grind to it. And the specific angles, you can do what you will. But I also take away a lot of the heel so I can turn a tight corner. And you'll see that more in a second. And then I kind of like to have a skew available because I find it makes that one little cut to separate the top from the blank a lot easier. But you can do that one with a spindle gouge. And that's it as far as your gouges. Now, if I'm doing a long all-day event, I will sharpen up my tools right before I leave. And then I will be honing them all day long with my little diamond slipstone. It's a 600 grit. And that's all I take out to the meat to sharpen. You also will need a chuck for your lathe. And I kind of, for this application, prefer the one-way with a little whammy bar style grippers. I just find it's really efficient to work that way. And the last thing, it's nice to have just a little sliver of sandpaper. You're not going to be sanding this project in very much at all, but sometimes the edges you create are so sharp that you might worry a kid could cut himself. So to blunt some of the edges, it's nice to use sandpaper. For the material, I really do like hard maple. The reason why is you can pick it out with very straight grains, so that very thin spindle on the top you can make very thin and it'll stay strong. It's hard enough to take years of abuse of kids dropping them and spinning them. It's a closed pore grain, so you can get really tighter stuff. Open pores, they get kind of stringy and they break a little bit easier. And it's a very uniform and cream color. So the markers take to it very, very well. And don't go for soft maple, go for the hard stuff. The harder the better, because you can get a really nice polish straight off the blade with the hard stuff. And that's about it. Oh, and you'll need Sharpies. And if you can, get the brighter color ones. Those bright pinks are going to be some of your favorite colors. The lime greens are going to be great. The teals are going to be common. The brighter colors seem to be what the kids gravitate towards. And you can get a 12-pack, but occasionally during every seasonal sale or something like that, places like Office Depots and those office stores, they'll have a sale where you can pick up 24 for the price of 6 or something like that. So whenever I see those, I'll generally grab a couple kits. One of these packages will last me most of the year. It's not using that much. More likely the kids are going to press too hard and burn them up and reduce the edge, but it's not that big a deal. Get yourself some Sharpies and get the name brand. Don't skimp on that. You're not saving much, and there is a difference. Now, concerning the lumber, I go get 6/4 rough stock from my local hardwood dealer. And once again, I will pick the pieces that have the tightest, straightest grain all the way down. You want the boring stuff for this kind of work. And if it's actually 6/4, that's not that big a deal. 6/4 to 8/4 are the ones I use the most. 8/4 are the ones a lot of times I will make to sell in toy stores because they're just a tad bit bigger and they bring a premium there. Now, whenever I'm measuring these, I cut them up into blanks that are roughly 5.5 inches because I can put that in the chuck, and all that is left when I'm done is about 1/2 inch of material. And this is just waste, or you can give it to a kid as a joke. Now, to get the perfect square, I will take it over to my table saw and I lay the board on the side and get the fence over so it butts up between the fence and the blade. That way, when I rotate it around, I can cut a perfect square. Now, you can do the same thing on a band saw if you don't have a table saw or you just don't like doing that. But when you work on the table saw, I do recommend that you cut the boards, cross-cut them at lengths where you would be getting about 4 or 5 of these out, because it's easier to handle, and I found that sometimes rough stock is still a little bit green, and as you're feeding it through, it'll kind of warp or release tension as it cuts. So the shorter the boards, within reason, it feels safer for me to working on the table saw. But then again, I'm kind of scared of the table saw. So after you do that one, either use a cross-cut sliding fence or your chop saw to get a perfect 90 degrees so that one of the sides is a perfect reference. You're going to need that one because when you load it up, basically you push it all the way forward so it seats at the bottom of your jaws really tightly. That makes it perfectly square. Then tighten them up. And once again, the reason why I like these whammy bars is because it's fairly quick and consistent. And there we go. It'll be perfectly parallel. And if you want to check it, just reference your tool rest. Notice I have not moved this tool rest. Once it's set for the entire day. So, let's make some tops. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is get a round out of your square blocks. And the thing is, you have a couple different purposes here when you're doing it for a live demonstration. A, you want the fanfare. You want shavings to be flying. You want people to draw their attention and to come in here. The other aspect is noise. I like to make a little bit of noise because it seems like each time you chuck up a new thing, it's kind of like a break, and the crowd will move on and a new crowd will come in. So you want to get as big as a small crowd as possible around you. You know, it's going to be 5 to 10 people watching you, and then they'll move on. And that's kind of one of the things I like about this, is because you can do it in 3 or 4 minutes, entertain people, make however many tops you sell to that group, and move on to the next group. Now, you can spin a non-round item as fast as you want, as long as it is balanced. And that's the key thing why we had to get square stock, and you had to put a 90 degrees on the end. Because by shoving it in there, I got this sticking out very straight, so whenever I spin it, it is balanced. Now, I keep them at 5.5 inches because that gives me enough room to make 3 tops. I have found that once I get to that 4th top lengthwise, I can't quite work as hard over here. It's a physics action because you're so far from there. There's a little bit more torque involved, and I can't go as quickly. So I keep it down to this size to make it safer. I don't have to have a tailstock at this level. because I'm not taking very heavy shavings. I'm taking fast shavings, but not heavy shavings. And it just seems to pace the show well. So we've got it set up. I come over, turn it on. There we go. And see, it is balanced. Now if it was unbalanced when you hand spun it, you can either reseat it or just turn it a little bit slower and keep going. By having this tailstock locked here where I never move it, it's kind of my test for how unbalanced can it be. Because if it starts touching this one, I just need to reseat it. So turn it up. Now here's the thing, you want to make some noise. You want to make a show. So typically when I'm by myself, I'll sit here and I'll come over. I'll do these rapid cuts. They are very short, quick, and they aren't getting much work done, but they're making a loud sound. And then at which point, basically that's done is knocked off all the corners. Not much else. I didn't get much work done. It's these long, smooth cuts that gets the work done. And I'll put my hand in front to block the shavings, but my palm is actually resting on the tool rest, so the palm touching the tool rest and the tool gives me my depth stop. And you'll be able to tell when it's smooth. If you want to, you can put your tool rest on top. It kind of shows the crowd what's happening. And then take one last pass, just to get it really nice and smooth, and to show off the thin shavings coming off. Plus the fact that I've got my finger on my tool rest, so now it looks nice and straight. And the crowd will notice that. That's kind of a nice little flare before you start, is you end up with a nice straight shape. If you already have a crowd around you, generally it's probably going to be little kids and stuff like that, because they kind of come in packs. Well, one kid just a few seconds ago was standing right here coloring a top or decorating the top. And you've got to get them to step back a little bit, because you are going to be throwing shavings around a little bit. And just to make the entire environment feel safe, because the parents are watching everything. And it is safe. If anything happens, if it breaks or something like that, it's going to come back this way, not that way. So it's all okay. But you are going to be throwing shavings back. So instead of just saying, okay, everyone stand back, we're going to be throwing shavings now, that kind of imparts a sense of danger, and we don't want that, especially if you want to get people into the craft. So what a lot of times I'll do is I'll just look at the kids and say, have you ever seen it snow in Texas? And probably most of them are going to say no, because it just doesn't snow here. Well, I go, okay, stand back, we're going to make it snow. And that adds a lot of theatrics to the whole just get back, okay? And then the parents will get in on the joke, and they'll have it come back. They'll escort them back a little bit to keep them and monitor them. And that's one key thing. If you've got kids here, the kids didn't get to the market by themselves. They got a parent around, so make sure that the parent is part of the presentation. Besides, the parent has the money. Now, if you're up north, you can't really use that snow technique, so maybe you can do something like, hey, have you ever seen fibrous snow or high fiber snow? And go off from there. Okay, stand back, we're gonna make it snow. So, real quickly, I want you to pay attention to my backhand position. So when you're doing a normal cut, you would actually hold the tool rest underhand with your thumb on top, and then you would just move your body back and forth. You would find the cutting edge, okay? Well, this, we're in front of a crowd. So what I'm doing, I think I showed you a little bit, in fact, I'm putting my palm on the tool rest. And in the normal position, it's your finger that's the depth stop. It kind of holds it in so it gives you better control. This time it's going to be my palm and my hand on top. My thumb is going to press down to keep you on the tool rest, and my hand is going to block the shavings. And I kind of spread them out and angle my fingers, because it kind of keeps the shavings going just right down there. Now, at this point in time, you know, I'm going to tell you to do something that you really shouldn't do, okay? Stop watching your work. Now, I've been doing this long enough that I know I'm not going in very far. I can go boom, 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 boom. It's just kind of in my hands right here. It's just a little movement. I'm not doing much. So I can actually look it up and I can start interacting with the crowd right here. I'm not paying attention to the wood. It's all locked into my body. Everything, it's a minor movement that you can gain control of. You can feel it, okay? It's just by feel. At this point in time, you want to read your crowd because kids, they're interested in it, but a lot of times the adults right now, if they are really focused in, you can actually turn around and say, hey, have you done any woodworking before? I always word it woodworking because if I say, have you done any turning before? A lot of people haven't, but they've got a lot of experience in woodworking and they understand the concept. If you say woodworking, they might go back to shop class and you can draw a little information out of them, get the conversation going. If they say no, I can start talking to them and say, hey, this is wood turning, unlike flat work, making tables and stuff like that. And I kind of call it woodworking for the ADD crowd, because you pretty much have instant gratification. And pretty much everything you needed to know to turn wood, you learned on the elementary school. Now at this point, you get to start talking to the kids and the adults at the same time. Shift your information to the kids and start talking about science. We're going to start talking about fulcrums and stuff. I've got the simplest tool we use in my hand and I am not quite finished making it completely round. I got a few flats on here. So I can take that opportunity of those last cuts to introduce people to the craft, to show them the intricacies of what you're doing and to prove to them why all those high prices you have and all the stuff behind you is justified. So if you have a kid right there, hey, you ever ride a seesaw or did the lawyers get rid of them before you had a chance to? Oh, you did? Cool. Okay, remember on the seesaw, you're sitting on the seesaw, you got the pivot point in the middle, one kid goes up 10 feet, one kid goes down 10 feet, right? You know what that pivot point is called? It starts with an F. Fulcrum, that's right. Okay. Now, what would happen if we move that fulcrum point half the distance over? All of a sudden, that kid on the one side still goes up and down 10 feet, but that kid over here, he only goes up and down 5 feet. You cut the distance in half, he goes up and down half. If I cut it in half again, all of a sudden, he's going up 2.5 feet. Cut it in again, it's 1.25 and half and half and half. It's what they call exponential as you go down. Now, what would happen if you move that fulcrum point all the way to this bevel right here and let them see the tool? See that? See, I have a solid bevel going around. Now, if I could pivot off of that one point, I can move the back of the handle a whole bunch and the cutting edge will barely move. And that's a secret to what they call spindle turning, is something called riding the bevel. It allows a clumsy ox like me to get really fine detailed work. Now, I want you to listen. Because when I'm turning, I'm going to come over here, I'm going to touch it to the tool rest, then I'm going to touch it to the wood. And the bevel will actually stay on the wood, and I can pivot off of that bevel. And you can hear it every single time. I come over, I turn my lathe on, touch a tool rest, you hear it, but there's no shavings coming off. The bevel is on the wood, and as long as I pivot off of that, all of a sudden I can see shavings coming off, so I now know the cutting edge is engaged. So I just lock this thing in my rock hard abs, no laughing. Lock in my rock hard abs and just move my body. So that's how we can get a lot of control. See, that's what they call leverage. And leverage can either give you power, like if you're jacking up a car, or it can give you control, like reducing the movement of that cutting edge. Okay? So you just introduced a science lesson, and you explained it in a manner that the parents all of a sudden say, hey, I might be able to do this. Touch it to the wood, lift up, move it across. You could then transition to shaping the thing, pick up your next tool, a spindle gouge, and point out the same bevel to them, and then talk about the only difference is a spindle gouge is the artistic tool of the wood turning world. And we use this to make beads and coves. A bead, you just touch a bevel down, you touch the wood over, and you lift up on the back of the handle while you shift it around. If you want to make a cove, you start up high and you go down low. Exactly opposite. So you can actually give them a very nice lesson, a added benefit to them patronizing here. Now, why is that important? Because if they buy that $3 tip and that $3 top, $3 or $4 top, and they give you a $5 bill, chances are they'll tell you to keep the change. It's all about the money. Now, at any point during the demonstration, if the kids or people are coming up a little bit too close, an easy way to stop the entire presentation without just making it look like you're stopping it because you're worried for safety reason, just turn it off, turn your lathe off, come over, pick up some shavings, and start talking about to the kids. And you can say, hey, you know what kind of wood this is? This is sugar maple. It's hard maple. You like maple syrup? Well, you know where maple syrup comes from, right? Trees, exactly. This is the tree your syrup comes from. You want to taste? See if it tastes like syrup? It's high fiber. No? Oh, you're pretty smart. And then you kind of throw it out there and they'll back off. Okay? But it gives you a chance to stop everything, brace it, without it appearing that you're stopping everything. And everyone gets a little bit of laugh. Then you can go, okay, back up again. We're going to get going again. And they'll all back up. So let's start talking about the cone of the top. Now, if you're just getting into turning, a top is one of the best projects you can do to learn your spindle turning skills, because it will really drive home the idea of bevel direction. Now here's my fingernail gouge, and they call it fingernail gouge because the shape is that of your fingernail coming up and around, and it has a bevel coming all the way around. But if you notice on the back of mine, see how close that's as far as I can zoom in. The actual bevel that I'm working on is way up here. Okay, I have one bevel that comes all the way around, and that sets the angle of my entire gauge. Can we see that in the camera? There we go. See that's the angle. You see the angle coming back and down. If I move it forward a little bit, this whole back section is just me removing metal, so it's nice and round. So I have a shorter bevel. Now if I were to just grind it all in one plane, then the bevel would be ending up way back here, and I can't pivot around the interior corners as much when I'm doing the handle. That's why I like that short bevel. It allows me a short pivot for convex corners. But that is the angle we are working with. And the idea with a spindle gouge is that you are going to cut, let me see if I can, there we go. That you're going to cut on the direction you're going. So if I'm going this direction, I'm going to cut on this half of the gouge. I don't ever want to touch the top wing because that will give me a catch. If I'm coming this direction, I want to cut on that half of the gouge. And generally you have two different ways of doing it. You can either point the tool in the direction you're going, or you can drag the tool. Dragging is really uncommon, but I'm going to show you why it's advantageous when we start working on the handle. So right now what I want to do is, generally when you're entering into wood, my bevel is pointing in the direction I want to go, even though my tool is perpendicular to my tool rest. So most people will tell you to start with it in the somewhat closed position where the flutes are right about perpendicular with the ground, whereas completely flat is open. So you kind of start out with closed and then you open it up to get the cut. And all we're going to do right now is remove that one corner when we cut this. So I turn the lathe on. If I'm on my jet, I've got it wide full open at this point because the jet only goes to about 2,000 RPMs. This one goes to about 3,600, and I think I'm right at 3,000 right now. So when I teach people to do it, I tell them to get it completely closed and then open it just a little bit. Put your thumb behind it and you kind of on top, and then you're just going to take the corner real slow. And you're pointing in the direction of that bevel going. Do it again. So this time, after you engage it, you can open it up a little bit. Then the next time, don't close anymore, and then you can just re-enter it in again, and again, And you can continue to open it up. And once you find the angle you want, you'll notice that I can't, as long as I'm pushing forward, it goes down. Now it skidded back because I was too far open and I didn't have enough back pressure. So you can enter, open, and go through. Enter, open, and go through. You want to engage the wood a little bit. Notice my handle comes around. Then I can come through. And come through. But by just pushing forward and not changing this back handle angle, you'll get a very nice straight cut. Now at this point in time, if there's anybody that's expressed some interest in the crowd in woodworking, or you've got a kid that's really enthralled with the idea of woodworking, you can stop and turn to the kid and say, have you ever done any woodworking? No? Not even sanding? Oh, you have sanded before. Isn't it boring? Now, have you seen me pick up any sandpaper yet? No? Come here. Feel this. Then you can invite the parents to come over and feel it. And it is actually glass smooth. You can actually see the reflection of the tool in the tool rest. But if you aren't glass smooth, I'm going to show you another trick. One of the other reasons why I round over the back is I can actually use the back of the gouge as a burnisher. So what's going to happen is I'm going to start cutting it, and then I'm going to press, after I get going, I'm going to press into the wood a little bit to increase the friction. And that friction is going to really crush those fibers to make it ultra smooth. So right now you can barely see the tool's reflection in the wood. Let's see if we can get it so you can see it crystal clear. So turn the speed up. I get the tool going through the cut. And right about now, I'm going to put pressure this way. So you see that tool in the... So now, all of a sudden, you can see the tool in the wood. It's reflecting the light. I'm hoping you can see that in the camera. And that is really glass smooth, and you can let them feel it. At that point, if you really have somebody interested in woodworking, you can continue the conversation about slicing fibers versus abrading them, blades versus sandpaper. Have you ever figured out why in the old days they could build a table in just a day, but it takes us a week? We sand all the parts, where they would just grab one of those old-timey hand planes you've seen out there in a few slices, and they've severed all the fibers instead of abrading it. That's why a lot of times today we mist the wood with water or some kind of filter and then sand between layers of finish, because the abraded fibers pick up the moisture and they swell, kind of like carpet. Whenever it gets water on it, it swells up, and we got to retake off those little tops. Whereas if you abrade it, you're not going to get that situation. And you can go on and on and on. It's just a matter of getting the conversation going and move on from there. But just the fact that you let the kids touch it before they color it, you're going to see a lot of just eyes light up. And once again, that is a time where it's not that you are building the value in the top. It's you are now building the value in that work behind you. Okay, now, on a second one, a lot of times you have leftover remnants, and I just use those for the shape. So once again, I'm going to start at the tip, and I've got it slightly open. I'm just going to follow my bevel line and just add the tip. Now here's the thing. Tips are kind of finicky. A really fine tip like I have right here, and you always see me feel it. It's very, very sharp. That will spin the best, spin the longest. But it's not very durable, and if you spin it on a wood bowl or something like that, it will actually dent the bowl very easily. So a lot of times I like to do them a little bit blunter or at a lower angle, but still fairly sharp. That's a lot more durable. So I feel it, yeah, I can still feel a point, but the angle is a lot less, so it's more durable. Another thing you can do is think about rounding it a little bit, so it's not a dead point, and that will spin very stably, just not quite as long. And when I say not quite as long, it might spin for a minute, where one with a very steep point will spin for 1 minute and 10 seconds. So it's not that big a deal. And after I get that point, I can do different shapes. I can come in directly and maybe scoop it out. I can come off the edges, but it allows every single one to be slightly different. Another thing you can do, if you are not getting the dead smooth surfaces that reflect your tool, well, you can also scrape them. I can use this bottom wing when I rotate it over like that. Once I get that wing so it's less than 90 degrees, this face, if I just slightly touch the wood at less than 90 degrees, that is actually a scraping cut. And I can come in here and just scrape a little shaving. And scraping will give you that nice smooth surface. Okay, just like that. Now, if you have one of your tops where the face is fairly flat like that, you have an opportunity to do another science lesson with the kids. And it works out really well if you have somebody in, the 6th to 9th grade level. You can ask them, hey, are y'all studying biology yet? Y'all start studying cells? Well, what's a cell look like? And a lot of times they'll talk about, oh, it's a nice round circle, you got the nucleus, all that kind of stuff. And he goes, have you ever seen one with your naked eye? Did you know you could? See, trees are one of the simplest organisms on Earth. They actually predate grass. Grass is newer than trees. And the tree cells are unlike the ones in our body, which are just like in your textbook, nice round circles and bubbly looking, because our bodies are mainly water. Well, a tree is mainly fiber. So its cells grow like long straws coming over. And what would happen if you cut just a slice of a straw off? Wouldn't you have a little circle with a little plastic on the outside like a piece of calamari? Well, watch this. And then you can come over and use that scraping cut. As long as you're severing the fibers exactly sideways, you can actually see little holes. And those are some of the cells of the tree that move water up and down. Now, if it's really windy, this isn't going to work. But I have a little, almost a flat right there. So I'm going to use the wing of my tool to scrape it until it's flat. And then I'm going to get these long, thin shavings that come off. And I'm going to try to catch them in my hand. It's kind of hard to do on windy days outside. So here we go. I come over, get it spinning nice. I engage it, the wing below 90 degrees, so it's a negative angle. I come over. There we go. Now look at those cells. Can you see the holes in them? You show it to the kids. Can you see the little holes? And they'll go, yeah, because, you can literally see the holes in between them. Well, what you're looking at is just a bunch of calamari that are kind of stuck together side by side. There's not much holding them together. So you want to see a magic trick? Put them in your palm. Okay, here we go. If you put one hand on top of it and just rotate your hand, guess what happens? You're separating all those little cells. There's not much holding it together. And it's gone. And all you have is this little fine powdery dust. Magic trick. You made it disappear. So yeah, you've got a little science lesson in there. And why is that important? Well, you have parents that are sitting over there watching you. Remember me telling you, hey, keep the change? Chances are you go up every time you add value to the presentation. So let's make some more tops. Okay, now we're going to start working on handles. But I want to review something with you really quickly. When we were doing the tip, the cone, there is no wood on this side. So once you sever the fibers on this side, the wood has a place to go. Watch. But when you're working with, there's going to be wood on this side and that side of the cut, what happens is you will sever the fibers on one side of your cut, but it will still be attached to the other side cut. So you start getting these ragged aspects of it. You can see we have a nice cut on this side, but this side it's already started flaying out. And that's going to get worse and worse and worse the deeper you go into your cut. The other thing you need to think of when you're getting rid of the waste is you are actually beginning the front of the next top. So if you want a handle that comes out maybe 1.5 times the length of the top, so right there, but your other top is going to be angled down here, you can actually start your next tops getting rid of the waste there. So you can actually use the creation of this side of your next top as a waste removal tactic. So a lot of times when I'm doing waste removal, I will actually start up on this side and come back this way with a bunch of relief cuts. But the thing is, you can only go so far, so deep. I can't just plunge in and go all the way down to a very thin handle on the first cut, because this wing right here, the bottom wing, it's cutting, but the back side of it is also scraping. So at a certain point, it actually starts to grab and fight back, and it just gets very hairy. So it's better to take a bunch of small cuts to get down to your final thickness and then smooth it all out. So I typically will begin where I want the end of my handle to be, work back one direction, then the other direction. It doesn't really matter which way you go because you'll end up in the same spot. So here we go. Starting there, I come in with my first cut. It's touch the bevel, lift, make sure the shavings are coming off of this side because I'm going that way, and notice I am open but canted slightly closed in the direction I am going. There we go. One cut. Notice it's ragged on one side, and after a certain point it just kind of stops. But the next cut I can go a little bit deeper. I can go a little bit deeper. But you see how it's ragged on this side. All you're actually basically doing right now is creating an escape path for the wood. And at this point I will typically deal with this edge right here. Now, it comes out to a very tight point, but no matter how I cut it or how sharp my tool is, it's always a tad bit rough. It feels serrated because of the grain direction. Now you could finish the entire top and then just come back and sand this one corner, but that's one extra step. So lately I've kind of gotten the habit of, at this point where it's very thick on the handle, I will finish this by just taking a very slight cut on that corner to add a lower angled bevel. Just that right there. And now all of a sudden it is very smooth to the touch. It's not serrated. It still has an edge, so it makes a nice crisp thing, and it gives some kids something to color on the very rim. But I don't have to go back and sand it. I'm not going to sand this thing at all if I can get away with it. But coming back here, see how rough those cuts? That's basically, I came in this direction with the cut, and those fibers just broke off. But now that I've gotten the face, the edge there, and the back corner somewhat the way I want, I'm now going to start removing the rest of this handle. And at this point, I will start going back this direction. Notice I'm taking a finer cut on this last pass. That's going to be the face of the next top, as I said before. So now we've got a finial, very rough. It's about 1/3 of the distance. Now if you want to clean up the back or add shapes to the back, now is the time, because if it gets any thinner, you're going to induce some vibration. And I'll show you a trick of using that vibration in a second, but we're starting out with just the basic top. So what I will do is, remember me talking about these bevels earlier. Let's see if I can get it. Okay, you see I got my front bevel there. If I angle a little bit more, you see the back one's just me removing waste material. And this front bevel, it's very thin. It starts here. And I've actually got this pretty thick for what I'm about to do, and it goes around. So it's only from here to here. That is what's setting the angle of all my cuts, right off that one pivot point. So I can do that one because I'm going to drop the cut down to the very corner, and I'm only going to be working this distance right here on my edge, and that way I can come in and turn a very tight cove on the bottom. If you watch how the shavings come off of that, you can see how I'm cutting it. So I come in, lathe speeds up, I engage the blade, I come down, and I turn that corner. That transition right there is really important for the quality of the overall top. You want something smooth and easy to do. Now if you put a sharp bend right there, a sharp angle, you'll end up spending a lot more time working on that one. A nice gentle curve works pretty well. And then you can just get rid of the rest of the waste. Okay, you can do that two different ways. What I just did right there was a dragging cut, a skewing cut. I'll go over that a little bit more in a second. But if you turn that corner, you can actually lead with your blade. And that's more of a pushing cut. And just go as thin as you feel comfortable. I will say this, you can get them extremely thin, but once it's, twice the thickness of a lead of a pencil, I wouldn't go too much thinner for younger kids. They have a harder time doing it. Actually, the thicker they are for the younger kids, it works out a little bit better. So now I have a nice smooth cut, and I took my time on that last cut to make it as smooth as possible. If you rush that last cut, you might get a little bit of tearing out, and the ink from the marker will spread out as it goes up and down the fibers. If you can get it a smoother cut, you get a better lines right there. Now, really quickly, let me talk about that pushing and dragging cut, the difference. So, I have my tool right here. I'm going to re-clean up that face, which means I'm cutting on the bottom edge, and the point is leading. So I come over here, I add the tip that I like. If I want to add any shapes, but I'm always pushing with that pointing edge. I come over to the end, I added some corner that I like. There we go. Now, when you're planing down that finer and finer handle, most of the time I revert to what they call a pulling cut or a skewed cut. So I have a skew right here. And when you're using the skew, you can see I've got the blade right there. As the wood enters into it, it's actually feeding into the skew, and you kind of fold it over, but the skew is moving this way. The angle is down. So you come over, you touch the bevel, you get the cutting edge, and I'm moving along with the angle. So you basically lay the blade down, and as it goes across the wood, the wood is actually coming into it, and the angle that it creates is about 40 degrees. And I'm basically moving forward in that 40 degrees. Instead of going tip first, I'm doing the blade first. Well, I can do the same exact thing with my skew. Instead of pushing into the cut, if I bring the back of the handle down, I can actually slide that blade along the wood at the 40-45 degree angle. Okay? And that'll get me a skewing cut, and it gets a nice smooth finish. It'll get you a very nice finish, but notice I am not engaging the blade at the corner, at the tip. I'm actually doing it along the side. And when I'm doing this, a lot of times I'm not doing it as radically down here on the blade. I'm actually doing it kind of up in this area, because it's a very fine finial that we're working on. And I'll do it in both directions, and I kind of drag it back and forth instead of pushing it one way or the other. So here we go. I'm going to use that pushing cut to get rid of a lot of the waste. I'm going to clean up my edge. I'll use another pushing cut to clean the rest of the waste out. And then I'm going to come over, I'm going to stick the corner in and do a somewhat half pushing, half dragging cut. One of a half pushing to get the corner in, and then I kind of drag it back. And you can get a very nice finish eventually doing this. Now I'm having to work around my camera so I can't really see what I'm doing. So one more time, I come back in, I push it into the corner, and I drag it back. Okay? That's a push cut. That's a pulling cut, skewing cut, dragging cut. And it gets you very nice shavings. Okay, real quickly, I'm going to show you another technique for getting rid of some of that waste. It's a little bit more of an advanced technique, and I'm going to show you some things that you really shouldn't do. But with practice, you'll be able to accomplish them safely. And the reason why I want to show it to you is a lot of people will sit there and they'll start saying, I mean, this is just mesmerizing watching you. And that's the kind of person you're trying to entertain with some very smooth cuts where the shape just kind of comes out after you. Coming in and roughing out those cuts with a bunch of what they call V cuts, half of it, where it gets all fragmented, that's not pretty. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. It's not an elegant cut. So what I'm about to show you is using that dragging technique, that pulling technique, to get rid of the waste in a way that's visually pleasing. Now, when you're turning, and especially when you're getting things thin, you always want to go towards the tailstock, because if you're pulling it out, if there's any slight catch or any kind of roughness, the torque action will actually break things off. So the general consensus is you always want to go towards a headstock, unless you just absolutely have to, for like you're turning a bead or something like that. But in those situations, it's a fairly thick piece of wood. We're coming down to something the size of pencil lead, and at that level it can easily break off. But I'm going to tell you to go against those rules. So I'm going to start out the same exact way I always do it. Starting at about where I want the tailstock to end, I come over and I rough it out. Clean up that one edge. Now, right now, this is pretty level at a certain depth. I went in about half the distance of my blade. So I'm going to come back from this side and clean up the cut. One pass cleans up the cut. And I'm actually getting shavings coming off down here around that bend. So it's actually a pulling cut even though I'm coming at the angle, because I'm not actually engaging the tip area. Now, if I were to just transition over and come back the other way, I could do a pulling cut that direction using this portion of the blade and go back and forth. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually stop short of hitting this edge on the shoulder, because that'll cause a catch and it'll want to rotate around. Same thing on this side. So I'm basically going to go from short, and you'll see where I'm working. But the idea is you always want to go downhill. So I'm going to start this way, work one way, rotate it, work the other way, work this way, work that way. And if you do it somewhat rapidly, it's more visually pleasing. And when I get down to this section, I can come back in and with one swipe, get down to somewhat my final shape. Come back the other way. And then one final cut, nice and slow, to give you a nice finish. I can do better than that. Pick up the edge. Nice straight handle. Okay, now when you're doing the handles, this is another opportunity to introduce another science or academia lesson. Now, I'm giving you all these kind of tips for the lessons to help sell it, to build value, to show people, to build trust with the parents, a relationship, to show value back there, all to build up the money that you can earn from what you're doing. But you don't have to do every single one with every single kid. pick and choose. And that way, when you have a crowd coming over, every single kid will get a different experience. And it'll be a lot more enjoyable for them. Then when they come back another time, chances are you will hit them with another added benefit. Now, we're turning at handles right there. And if you have a kid in middle school and stuff like that, that's where you can talk to them about gears and gear ratios and stuff. So I'm turning this one. You have a kid right there. Do you ride a bicycle? Does your bicycle have multiple gears? It does? Okay, I want you to think about the rear wheel on your bicycle, all those gears you have on them. Which one of them makes you go faster? The big one or the small one? Big one? Are you sure? Well, think about it this way. You have your pedals. That has a big gear on it, right? Then you have the rear wheel. Well, if your pedals and the rear wheel have the same size gear, they turn at the same speed whenever you pedal, right? But if you have a small gear on the back one, you turn this wheel one time, this one has to turn a whole bunch of times to keep up, correct? So, which one makes you go faster on the rear wheel? Small wheel, there you go, small gear. Well, a top is just like your bicycle gear set. You have a big gear that with just one twist of your fingers, you can make it go around maybe half a turn. Then you have the small gear. With one twist of the fingers, it'll make the top go around 6 or 7 times. So the smaller you get that handle, the faster you can make your top spin. So here's a question for you. Here's the handle we've got so far. Is that fast enough for you? Yet? No. Well, here, I'm going to give you a life lesson. You know what that means? Something you never forget. If somebody ever asked you, is it fast enough? Standard answer, always no. Got that? Remember that when you start driving. Okay, so here we go. Coming along. Is that fast enough for you? No? Good answer. Okay. Is that fast enough for you? No? You're learning. Okay. Now, since you're not driving yet, I'm going to say this one right here, it's fast enough. At least until you get your learner's permit. And then go on from there. Okay? It gave them a quick little mechanical engineering lesson on gear ratios. Now here's another lesson you can consider whenever you're doing the handles. When you get it down to about the thickness of a pencil, if you practice this at home before you do it in front of a live crowd, you can actually induce a squeal of vibration by cleaning up the back side of the handle. And as you do it, pressing ever so slightly against it this way. And that'll induce a vibration, a squeal, that you can actually control a little bit. So you come over here, you're turning it. Now everything's been turning, normal turning sounds. You come over, you're going to clean up the back of it, and you hear that? You know what that is? That's the wood vibrating. It's resonating. And that's actually why they make musical instruments out of wood. Because different species will vibrate differently at different thicknesses. That's why a violin made out of mahogany sounds a lot different than a fiddle made out of maple. So you can go along there, talk about resonance, vibrations, that kind of stuff. You can take that as far as you want. Another cool thing is you can talk about how vibrations are equal. They're kind of a pattern. So I cause that vibration on the back side of the top. Now watch what happens when we color it. Because this is a light colored wood, take a darker color, and if you just lightly skim it, you're not pressing down onto it, you're just going to touch the tops of those vibrations. And it creates a cool little spiral. Now the next thing I want to talk about is color. And color is one of those things that there's a lot of opportunity out there for you to bring added benefit to the presentation. I mean, you can sit there and talk about the color wheel, tertiary, complementary. You can even talk about color mixing, because what does yellow and blue make? Green. And because Sharpies are somewhat translucent, the colors will blend with each other, which is why if you get a kid that goes through the entire color packet on in your display, their top will probably end up looking like black. This is additive color, CMYK color. You can talk about RGB versus CMYK. One's with light, one's with inks. Now, I think I've talked about earlier, I do recommend you get the Sharpie. I found that they last a lot longer, but more importantly, the tip. And the tip is one of those lessons where you can present the information in a way that the kid or the student can come up with the answer on their own. It can boost their confidence. It can get them to realize that real life experience is a lesson unto themselves. They can learn on their own. So what a lot of times I would do is if I get a new kid out there and we're to the color stage, I can ask them, hey, have you ever played around with paintbrushes? Well, let me ask you, do you drag the paintbrush or do you push a paintbrush? Well, what happens when you push a paintbrush? Yeah, the hair is kind of spread out and stuff like that. You can't get a really crisp line, right? Well, believe it or not, a Sharpie is just like a paintbrush, except instead of hairs, it's got little felt fibers running around to a very fine point. So, whenever I turn this lathe on, it's going to be rotating where the top of it is coming back towards me and the bottom is going towards you. So, in order to get a very fine line, just like a paintbrush, we want to drag it. So let me ask you, what part of the top will you want to touch the marker to? The top or the bottom if you want to get a crisp line? Then they can sit there and talk about, think it over, and they'll figure out that on their side they want to touch it to the top, and on your side you kind of want to touch it on the bottom. So it drags the marker. Now if you do that one, it'll also make your markers last longer. The tip will stay blunt. Really young kids, don't worry about it. These are disposable items. They're going to blunt those tips. They're going to jam it on there. But if you haven't had a lot of added bonus opportunities in a specific display, that's just another one. And if you want a lot more, one of my first videos I ever did was turning a top to explain Newton's law. So you can go back and look at that one, and that'll give you a lot more information of things that you can come into the situation. On to the next montage. The last thing you want to do is take your top off. And this you need to take into care. You don't want to just break it off. You actually want the end of your handle to have as good a tip as the front of it. Because I don't know how you're going to do your tops, but I guarantee all my tops to spin in multiple dimensions. I call it the Doctor Who claws. So you can spin it on either end, upside down or right side up. It's up to you. So that point is incredibly important. And that's why I bring out my skew, is because it allows me to get a V cut. Now the skew in this situation is that one point that I'm dealing with, and I am sharpening that constant because you really want it to slice the fibers. So I'm going to bring it up here. I'm going to make a series of V cuts. But before I make my last cut, you're going to see me actually stop, reach around around it, and I'm going to hold it here so it doesn't go flying anywhere, and I'll catch it in my hand. So here we go. Turn the speed up. First cut just kind of compresses fibers and spreads them around. Second cut, I come over a little bit more and just ease it in, and it's following the angle of this bevel. Third cut, I touch, I'm going to go in about halfway, and then I'm going to let go with my hand, bring it around, and then I just kind of rotate it up, and it finishes the cut, and it gives me a nice point. So, not only are you allowed to spin it one way, but just by flipping it over, you can spin it upside down too. Let's see how long it'll spin. Now, if you have any other ideas for added benefits or academia that we can bring to a presentation such as this, please leave those down in the comments below. We can all benefit from more information. And if you like this video, do me a big favor. Like, favorite, subscribe, do all those social medias. Tell your friends. I think I blew it over. Tell all your friends. And if you want to, visit wortheffort.com, where I have a lot more information on ways you can patronize us. I run an online store, blog, I'll have plans in the future, lots of different swag and stuff like that there. All of that allows me to buy materials and subsidize my time for making such of these videos. And I want you to remember one last thing. It is always worth the effort to learn, create, and share with others. Y'all be safe and have fun.